Welcome to the Stillness Broadcast. Tonight we gather in the spaces where certainty dissolves and the familiar becomes strange. Whether you're settling in for sleep or keeping watch through the dark hours, you've found your place here. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. There's something profound about knowing we're scattered across the world, yet gathered here in this shared darkness, listening to the same whispers. If these stories speak to you, consider subscribing. There are always more tales waiting in the stillness. Let's begin. Story 1. Graham Vickers stood at the loading dock of the Valdosta Community Center, watching his breath condense in the November air. The metal doors behind him rattled in their frame with each gust of wind, a sound he'd grown accustomed to over the past 6 weeks of organizing the winter donation drive. At 49, recently terminated from his quality assurance position at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Graham had discovered that organizing charity drives was both meaningful work and a way to fill days that would otherwise stretch empty before him. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. His daughter Claire no longer returned his calls. The charity work was all that remained of his identity as someone who helped, someone who mattered. He was meticulous by nature. His donation logs were color-coded, receipts filed chronologically, inventory spreadsheets updated hourly. Control was comfort when everything else felt uncertain. The truck arrived at 4:17, early twilight, already thickening into dusk. Graham checked his clipboard and waved the driver toward the bay. Standard Goodwill transport, white panels dulled by road grime, Georgia plates. The driver, a young man whose name tag read Owen, climbed down from the cab and stretched. "Got a full load for you," Owen said. "The state clean out from over in Waycross. Lady died last month. No family. Everything's going to charity." Graham nodded and followed Owen to the truck's rear doors. The smell hit him first when Owen pulled them open. Not decay. He would have recognized that from his years inspecting pharmaceutical storage facilities. This was something else. Detergent and fabric softener mixed with something chemical and sharp. Bleach, perhaps. And beneath that, a smell like rust and meat left too long in the refrigerator. "Jesus," Owen said, pulling his collar over his nose. "Smelled fine when we loaded it." The truck's interior was packed floor to ceiling with the detritus of a life. Cardboard boxes, plastic bins, garbage bags stuffed with clothing, furniture wrapped in moving blankets, stacks of books held together with twine. The ordinary archaeology of existence. Graham helped Owen unload, both men working quickly in the cold. The community center's storage room gradually filled with the dead woman's possessions. Graham logged each item in his spreadsheet, noting condition and approximate value. Box after box of clothing, kitchen supplies, linens that smelled strongly of that chemical sweetness, a collection of ceramic angels, each one's face slightly different but all sharing the same eerie smile. "That's the lot," Owen said finally, climbing back into his truck. "Good luck sorting through it all." Graham watched the truck's taillights disappear into the November dusk, then returned to the storage room. The smell was stronger now, thick enough to taste. He'd need to sort everything tonight. The distribution was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and families were counting on him. He started with the clothing. Most of it was women's wear, sizes that suggested the deceased had been small and elderly. Floral print dresses, cardigans in muted colors, sensible shoes with worn heels. He folded each item carefully, checking pockets out of habit. In a blue cardigan, he found a receipt from a grocery store dated 3 years ago. In a coat pocket, a tissue and a cough drop still in its wrapper. The bins contained kitchen items, dishes in patterns from decades past, cutlery with wooden handles, a set of measuring cups nested inside each other, all of it clean, carefully packed, ready for a new home that would never materialize for the woman who'd owned them. Graham was opening the 5th box when his phone rang. Claire's number. He stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering, his heart suddenly loud in his ears. "Dad." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Claire. Hi, I'm glad you called. She paused. "I just wanted to say I got your messages. About Thanksgiving. You're welcome anytime. You know that. You and Derek both." "I know. I need some more time. Is that okay?" Graham looked around the storage room at all these belongings that had outlived their owner. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." After she hung up, he sat for a long moment among the boxes. The smell seemed stronger now, sweet and chemical and wrong. He'd been holding his breath without realizing it. He returned to sorting. More clothing, more kitchen supplies, a box of photographs, black and white images of people whose names he'd never know, their smiles frozen in moments that had seemed important enough to capture. He set the photos aside. Someone might want them for art projects. In the next box, wrapped in newspaper, he found the bottles. There were 13 of them, each one no larger than his thumb, made of dark blue glass with rubber stoppers. No labels. Graham held one up to the fluorescent light. The liquid inside was clear as water and moved with a viscosity that seemed slightly wrong, too thick or too thin. He couldn't decide which. The chemical smell was coming from these bottles. Graham's quality assurance training kicked in automatically. Unknown liquids, improper storage, no labeling, potential hazards. These should be disposed of properly, not distributed to families with children. He was gathering them back into their box when he noticed the notebook. It had been wrapped with the bottles, a small spiral-bound journal with a blue cover. Graham opened it, expecting recipes or gardening notes. Instead, he found careful handwriting and faded ink, entries dated over the course of 3 years. January 3rd. Mrs. Patterson came by today. Brought me soup. She means well, but her pity is exhausting. Used 3 drops. She left after 20 minutes. Said she suddenly felt unwelcome. Perfect. January 17th. The church group wants me to join their grief counseling. I told them no 5 times. They won't listen. Used 5 drops on the doorknob. None of them will return. February 2nd. Claire called again about selling the house. She doesn't understand that I need to be left alone. 4 drops in the envelope with my reply. She won't call back for months. Graham's hands had gone cold. He flipped through more pages, hundreds of entries, all following the same pattern. Someone visited. The writer used drops from the bottles. The visitor left and didn't return. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Actually, I don't think Thanksgiving is a good idea. Sorry. Graham stared at the message. They'd just spoken. She'd said she needed time, not that she wouldn't come. What had changed in 5 minutes? He looked at his hands. He'd been handling the bottles. The liquid on his fingers felt slightly warm, slightly slick. His phone buzzed again. A text from Monica, his ex-wife. Please stop contacting Claire. You're making this harder for everyone. He hadn't contacted Claire. She'd called him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that frequency that made his teeth ache. Graham looked around the storage room. All these boxes, all these belongings. The woman who'd owned them had been alone. No family, no one to claim her things. He flipped to the last entry in the notebook. November 8th. It's been 3 years since anyone has visited. The bottles still work, but there's no one left to use them on. I've pushed everyone away so successfully that I will die alone, and no one will know for weeks. This is what I wanted, isn't it? To be left alone? The date was 4 weeks ago. Graham's phone buzzed again. The community center director. Graham, we need to talk about your role with the charity drive. Some concerns have been raised, and another, his daughter. I think it's best if we don't communicate for a while. And another, Owen, the truck driver. Something felt weird about that delivery. Don't contact me again. Graham looked at his hands. The chemical smell was stronger now, rising from his skin like perfume. That sweet, sharp scent that pushed into the sinuses and settled at the back of the throat. He tried to wash it off in the community center bathroom, scrubbing with soap until his skin was raw. The smell remained. It seemed to be getting stronger, emanating from his pores, his breath, his clothing. That strange, viscous liquid had soaked into him, and now it was seeping out, invisible but present, a chemical boundary around his body that whispered to everyone nearby, "Leave, go, you are unwelcome here." His phone buzzed continuously now, messages from people he barely knew, all with the same theme. "Don't contact me. Stay away. Something about you feels wrong." Graham sat on the bathroom floor, his back against the cold tile wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed their eternal song. He thought about the woman who'd owned the bottles, how she'd used them to create space around herself, to push away the inconvenient emotions of others, their pity and concern and love, how she'd achieved the perfect isolation she'd claimed to want, how she died alone and no one had noticed for weeks. He looked at his phone. 37 messages now, each one a small rejection, a tiny abandonment. People pulling away from him as if he carried a disease. He did carry a disease. It was in his skin now, in his blood. The bottles had held something that broke the invisible threads between people, that severed the bonds of obligation and affection. The woman had used it deliberately, carefully, in measured drops. Graham had spilled it on his hands, absorbed it through his skin, and now it was working at full strength. He tried calling Claire. The phone rang once, then went to voicemail. Blocked. He tried Monica. The same. He tried David, his former colleague at Meridian. Straight to voicemail. The community center was dark now, except for the storage room. Graham walked back through the piles of donated belongings. All the clothes, the dishes, the photographs of strangers. These were the remains of a woman who'd pushed everyone away so successfully that she'd erased herself from the world while still living in it. He understood now why the estate had been cleaned out by strangers, why Goodwill had sent a driver who didn't know the deceased, why everything was being given away to charity rather than family. There was no one left who cared enough to claim any of it, and now Graham was infected with the same isolation. He sat down among the boxes and waited for his phone to stop buzzing. It took another hour. By then, he'd been blocked or removed from every contact list, every social media connection, every tenuous thread that had linked him to the human world. The storage room was silent except for the fluorescent lights and the building settling with sounds like small bones breaking. Graham picked up the notebook and read through it again, more carefully this time. The woman's name appeared only once in an early entry. Sarah Matheson. She'd been 63 when she started using the bottles. She'd lived alone for 3 years after that. 73 days after the final entry, she'd been found dead in her home. According to a newspaper clipping tucked into the back of the journal, heart failure, the clipping said, natural causes, no family to claim the body. Graham looked at his phone. No new messages, no missed calls. The silence was absolute. He thought about tomorrow's distribution drive. Families would come, expecting help, expecting charity. Would they feel the same wrongness when they approached him? Would they leave without taking donations, driven away by the invisible chemical boundary around him? He packed the bottles back into their box. He should dispose of them properly. He should call someone, hazmat, the health department, someone. But his phone was dead to him now, and he understood that no one would answer anyway. The isolation was already complete. The community center was his now, the storage room full of a dead woman's possessions, the fluorescent lights and the November cold. He could stay here, sorting through Sarah Matheson's belongings, organizing them with his meticulous color-coded system. He could maintain the illusion of purpose, of helping, of mattering, or he could leave and discover how thoroughly he'd been erased from the world. Graham stayed. He sorted through boxes until dawn. He logged every item in his spreadsheet with perfect precision. He folded clothing with careful attention to detail. He arranged dishes by pattern and era. He organized someone else's life because he no longer had his own. When the sun finally rose, pale November light filtering through the loading dock windows, Graham heard cars pulling into the parking lot. Families arriving for the distribution. He walked to the front door to unlock it, then stopped with his hand on the handle. Through the glass, he could see them, parents with children, elderly couples, people in need of help, of charity, of the kindness of strangers. They were chatting with each other, breath condensing in the cold morning air, waiting for the doors to open. Graham turned the lock and pulled the door inward. The people stopped talking. One by one, they looked at him, and he watched their expressions change. Discomfort, unease, an instinctive desire to be elsewhere. The crowd began to disperse. First a few people drifting away, then more, then all of them, scattering to their cars without a word. Within 5 minutes, the parking lot was empty. Graham stood in the doorway watching them go. The chemical smell rose from his skin, invisible and pervasive. That sweet, sharp scent that meant go away. Leave me alone. I am unwelcome, and I make you unwelcome in return. He closed the door, locked it, returned to the storage room where Sarah Matheson's possessions waited in their careful rows. He would organize them. He would maintain his spreadsheets. He would preserve the illusion of control and purpose and meaning. And he would never leave this building because the world outside had already forgotten he existed. The fluorescent lights buzzed their eternal frequency. The building settled with its small breaking sounds. Graham sat among the boxes and opened his laptop to update his inventory logs. Control was all he had left, and control had abandoned him. Story 2. The apartment smelled of nothing when Cora Geller first crossed its threshold. She stood in the center of the living room, breathing carefully through her nose, testing the air. Her therapist had encouraged mindful engagement with space, though Dr. Ringgold had never explained what one was supposed to do when space itself seemed to be holding its breath. Cora was 32, recently unemployed from a graphic design position that had dissolved along with the startup that employed her, and desperately in need of affordable housing in Baltimore. The apartment on Divisadero Street was impossibly cheap. $700 a month for a one-bedroom in a neighborhood where studios typically went for $15. The landlord, a woman named Mrs. Chen with silver hair and an apologetic smile, had explained the price by way of disclosure. "Someone died here," Mrs. Chen had said, her English precise and careful. "3 months ago. The law requires I tell you this." Cora had expected this to be the catch. Every cheap apartment had one. A roach problem, a freeway view, a bathroom that flooded. A dead tenant was just another item on the list of urban compromises. "How did they die?" Cora had asked, because it seemed like the question one was supposed to ask. "Heart attack," Mrs. Chen had said. "Very peaceful. She was found quickly. No damage." Cora had taken the apartment. She couldn't afford to let squeamishness about a stranger's death prevent her from having a roof over her head. People died everywhere, all the time. The world was full of ghosts if you believed in that sort of thing. Cora did not believe in that sort of thing. The apartment was small but well maintained. Hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. High ceilings with crown molding, windows that faced east, letting in morning light. The previous tenant's furniture had been removed, but the space still held impressions of habitation, nail holes in the walls where pictures had hung, slight discolorations on the floor where a couch and chair had stood. Cora moved in on a Saturday in February. Her possessions fit into her Honda Civic with room to spare. A futon, a small desk, boxes of clothes and kitchen supplies. The accumulated debris of 32 years condensed into 18 trips up 3 flights of stairs. By evening, she was exhausted and settled. The futon was made with clean sheets. Her laptop sat on the desk, charging. A pot of pasta simmered on the stove, filling the apartment with the smell of garlic and tomatoes. Normal smells, living smells. The apartment was accepting her, making room for her life. She ate dinner sitting on the futon, laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through job listings. Freelance graphic design, contract work, anything that would pay rent and keep her from moving back to Ohio, where her mother would greet her failure with a smile that meant "I told you so." The apartment was quiet, not silent. She could hear traffic from the street, pipes rattling in the walls, the building settling with the temperature change of evening, but quiet in a way that suggested peaceful solitude rather than oppressive isolation. Cora slept well that first night. The smell started 3 days later. She woke at 6, the apartment still dark, and knew immediately that something was different. A scent had filled the space while she slept, sweet and floral and dense. Perfume, she thought, though she didn't wear perfume. Too expensive, and her skin reacted badly to most fragrances. She walked through the apartment, sniffing like a dog, trying to locate the source. The smell was everywhere and nowhere, strongest in the living room, but present in the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. A flowery sweetness that reminded her of department stores and funeral homes, and elderly women in church pews. Cora opened all the windows despite the February cold. She searched the apartment for air fresheners or sachets the previous tenant might have left behind. She found nothing. The smell persisted, thick enough to taste, settling at the back of her throat. By afternoon, the smell had faded. By evening, it was gone entirely. Cora convinced herself she'd imagined it, or that some smell from a neighboring apartment had seeped through the walls. Old buildings were porous. Sounds and smells traveled through them like water finding cracks. The smell returned the next morning. Same time, same intensity. That sweet floral density that pushed into her sinuses and stayed there. Cora tried to ignore it, but perfume was not something easily ignored. It demanded attention. It colonized air and made itself known. She mentioned it to Mrs. Chen when she dropped off her first rent check. Perfume? Mrs. Chen's expression shifted. Something that might have been recognition or concern. What kind of perfume? Floral, sweet, old-fashioned, maybe. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. The previous tenant, she said finally. She wore perfume, very strong. She made it herself. Is there any left in the apartment? Maybe tucked away somewhere. No, we cleaned very thoroughly. Could it be in the walls, absorbed into the plaster or something? Mrs. Chen looked at her with an expression Cora couldn't read. Perhaps, she said. I will send someone to check. No one came to check. The smell continued. Every morning at 6, Cora would wake to that sweet floral density, and every afternoon it would fade. She bought air fresheners. She burned sage, even though she found the practice absurd. She left windows open until her heating bill doubled. Nothing worked. She researched online. Phantom smells, olfactory hallucinations, parosmia, all the medical terms for experiencing scents that weren't there. But the smell was there. It was real. It filled the apartment like fog, thick and present and undeniable. Cora called her mother something she rarely did, because she needed to talk to someone. Maybe the apartment is haunted, her mother said, her tone suggesting she found this possibility both plausible and concerning. I don't believe in ghosts, Cora said. Belief isn't required for existence. Cora had hung up annoyed, but the conversation stayed with her. The previous tenant had died here. Heart attack, Mrs. Chen had said. Peaceful, but people who died peacefully didn't usually leave behind aggressive, haunting perfume smells that appeared on schedule every morning. She started searching for information about the previous tenant. The building was old enough that records existed in physical form in city archives. But online searches turned up nothing. No obituary, no social media presence. It was as if the woman had been erased from public record the moment she died. Cora tried asking neighbors. The building held 12 units, which meant 11 other people who must have known the woman who lived directly above them, or beside them, or below them. But every door she knocked on either went unanswered or opened to reveal residents who claimed to have never met the previous tenant of apartment 7. Kept to herself, one man said. Never saw her, another woman offered. Didn't even know anyone lived there until the ambulance came, said an elderly couple on the first floor. It was possible. Urban anonymity was real, but it seemed unlikely that a woman could live in a small building for years. Cora learned from Mrs. Chen that the tenant had been there for 12 years, without anyone knowing anything about her. The smell intensified. By the end of February, it was appearing twice a day, morning and evening, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., regular as a clock. The sweet floral density would flood the apartment, hold for approximately 3 hours, then dissipate. Cora's sleep suffered. She began waking at 5:55, anticipating the smell, her body tense with dread. When it arrived, punctual and pervasive, she felt something between relief and defeat. She was becoming aware that the smell was changing her. She stopped inviting friends over. The few job interviews she secured went badly because she was convinced she carried the perfume smell on her clothes, in her hair, on her skin. She found herself avoiding enclosed spaces, elevators, subway cars, coffee shops, anywhere the smell might follow her and announce to the world that she was infected with something. By March, Cora was spending most of her time in the apartment, doors and windows sealed, as if she could trap the smell inside and prevent it from seeping into the outside world. She ordered groceries online. She communicated with potential clients by email. She was becoming invisible, erasing herself from the city the same way the previous tenants seemed to have been erased. She realized this on a Tuesday afternoon when she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked thin, drawn. Her skin had taken on a grayish quality from lack of sunlight. Her eyes held a hunted expression. She looked like someone who was dying slowly, and the thought arrived with absolute clarity. This is what happened to the previous tenant. Cora called Mrs. Chen and demanded information. The woman who died here. What was her name? Her name. You have rental records. You have a lease. What was her name? A long pause. Isabel Marchmont. How did she really die? Another pause. Heart attack. You're lying. I am not lying, Mrs. Chen said, and her voice held something that might have been genuine distress. Her heart stopped. That is what the coroner said. But why it stopped? That is a different question. Tell me. She was found in the living room. She had been dead for 2 days, perhaps 3. She was... Mrs. Chen paused, searching for words. She was sitting in a chair and the room was full of perfume. Bottles of it. Everywhere. She had made it herself. Custom scents. The coroner said she died of natural causes, but I think she drowned in perfume. I think the smell killed her. Cora's hands had gone cold. You rented me an apartment where someone died from perfume. The apartment was cleaned, professionally. Every surface scrubbed. It should be safe. But the smell came back. Yes, Mrs. Chen said quietly. The smell came back. Cora hung up. She stood in the center of the living room, the phone still in her hand, and understood that she was trapped. She couldn't afford to break her lease. She had nowhere else to go. And even if she left, what would happen to the next tenant? Would they inherit the same slow poisoning, the same gradual erasure? She started investigating Isabel Marchmont. No online presence, no obituary. But the city archives held records, and Cora was determined. She spent a week going through old documents, building a picture of the woman who died in her living room. Isabel Marchmont had been 64, unmarried, no children. She'd worked as a perfumer for a boutique company that had gone out of business in the early 2000s. After that, she'd made custom scents from her apartment, selling them online to a small but devoted clientele. Cora found a list of clients in the archives, part of an estate settlement document. She started calling them. Most numbers were disconnected. 3 people answered. All 3 said the same thing. They'd stopped ordering from Isabel because the perfumes had changed. They'd become too strong, too invasive. Wearing them felt like being colonized by someone else's identity. The last one I ordered, a woman in Philadelphia said, I put it on and I felt like I was disappearing, like the perfume was replacing me. I threw it away and never contacted her again. Cora hung up and looked around her apartment. The smell was starting its evening cycle, that sweet floral density filling the space like water filling a tank. She was drowning in Isabel Marchmont's final creation, a perfume so strong it had survived the woman's death, so invasive it had soaked into the walls and floors and was now seeping out, reconstituting itself from the building's bones. She thought about Isabel, sitting in her chair, surrounded by bottles of perfume, her heart stopping as the scent overwhelmed her respiratory system and seeped into her bloodstream and poisoned her slowly from the inside. Had she known what was happening? Had she welcomed it? A perfumer dying by her own creation seemed almost poetic. a completion of the circle between creator and creation. Cora realized she was thinking about death with a strange detachment, as if it were inevitable, as if she'd already accepted what was going to happen. She tried to leave. She packed a bag and walked to the door and found that she couldn't open it. Not physically couldn't, the lock worked fine, but some profound reluctance had taken root in her body. Stepping outside felt impossible, like trying to walk through a wall. The perfume had colonized her so thoroughly that leaving its source felt like abandoning herself. She unpacked her bag. She sat on the futon. She breathed the sweet floral density and felt it settle into her lungs, her blood, her bones. She was becoming Isabel Marchmont, or perhaps Isabel Marchmont was becoming her. The boundary between self and other was dissolving in perfumed air. Days passed. Cora stopped answering her phone, stopped checking email, stopped going online. The world outside the apartment became theoretical, a place that might exist but had no relevance to her current reality. Her reality was the smell, the sweet floral density, the gradual erasure of identity as the perfume replaced her piece by piece. She started seeing Isabel, not as a ghost. Cora still didn't believe in ghosts, but as a presence, a shape in peripheral vision, a figure sitting in the corner where the chair must have been, wearing Cora's face, wearing Cora's body, looking more solid and real, while Cora herself felt increasingly transparent. By April, Cora understood that she was dying. Not dramatically, not painfully, just fading, the way scent fades when exposed to air for too long. She was becoming a memory of herself, and soon even that memory would dissipate. She thought about calling someone. Her mother, Dr. Ringgold, Mrs. Chen. But what would she say? That she was being killed by perfume. That a dead woman's final creation was erasing her from existence. It sounded absurd even in her own mind. She sat on the futon and watched the figure in the corner. Isabel sat in her invisible chair and watched back. They looked more alike every day. Same thin frame, same grayish skin, same hunted expression. Cora's last coherent thought was that she should have listened to her mother. Belief wasn't required for existence. The impossible happened regardless of whether you acknowledged it. The apartment had killed Isabel Marchmont, and now it was killing her. And someday it would kill whoever came next. The perfume would persist. It would seep from the walls during its scheduled cycles, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., regular as a heartbeat. It would invite the next tenant to breathe deeply, to accept its sweet floral density, to gradually dissolve into scent and memory, and nothing. Mrs. Chen found Cora's body 3 weeks later. Heart attack, the coroner said. Natural causes. She'd been sitting on the futon, the apartment filled with the overwhelming smell of perfume, though no bottles were present. The apartment was cleaned professionally, every surface scrubbed, the furniture removed, all traces of Cora Geller erased. 6 weeks later, a new tenant moved in, a young man, recently divorced, in need of affordable housing. He thought the apartment smelled slightly of flowers, but nothing concerning, nothing that would prevent him from signing a lease. On his 4th morning, he woke at 6 a.m. to a smell so sweet and dense it filled his lungs like water. He opened windows. He searched for the source. He found nothing. By afternoon, the smell had faded. By evening, he'd convinced himself he'd imagined it. And somewhere in the walls, in the floorboards, in the plaster and paint and bones of the building, the perfume waited, patient, persistent, ready to begin its work again. The apartment always killed peacefully. Heart attack. Natural causes, no damage, and every tenant looked a little more like Isabel Marchmont before they died, and a little less like themselves. Story 3. Nolan Hetherington was checking the lighthouse lamp when he first heard the singing. The sound came from the rocks below, carried on the November wind that had been battering Cape Agony for 3 straight days. A woman's voice, high and clear, cutting through the crash of waves against stone. He paused with his hand on the lamp's brass housing, listening. The lighthouse stood 200 feet above the Atlantic, perched on a granite cliff that had been killing ships for 3 centuries before someone finally built a warning light. The nearest town was Harborview, population 412, 8 miles down a coastal road that became impassable during storms. Nolan was 51, a former marine biologist whose career had ended when funding dried up and universities stopped hiring. The lighthouse keeper position had appeared like a lifeline. 6 months of solitary work, room and board provided, enough salary to start rebuilding savings that had been depleted by unemployment. He'd been here for 2 months, and the isolation had become comfortable, preferable even to the complex social requirements of life on the mainland. The singing continued. Nolan walked to the gallery that circled the lamp room and looked down. The rocks below were jagged black shapes slick with spray. No one could survive down there. The waves hit with enough force to pulverize bone. Yet the singing was undeniable, a wordless melody, rising and falling with the rhythm of the sea. Nolan descended the spiral stairs to the keeper's quarters, found his binoculars, and returned to the gallery. He scanned the rocks methodically, section by section. Nothing. The singing continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. He checked the time. 3:18 in the afternoon. Nearly sunset this far north in November. The light would come on automatically at dusk, as it had every night for the past 60 years since the lighthouse was electrified. His job was maintenance and observation, report any ships in distress, keep the light functional, survive 6 months of solitude without going insane. The third requirement was proving more difficult than anticipated. Nolan had dinner, canned soup and bread, while the singing continued outside. He'd grown accustomed to the sound of wind and waves, but this was different. This was structured, intentional, the product of a conscious mind. He tried the radio. The keeper's quarters included a VHF set for communication with the Coast Guard. Raise them on Channel 16. Cape Agony Light to Harborview Station. Do you copy? Static. Then a voice. Harborview Station. Go ahead, Cape Agony. Are there any boats in the area? Anyone conducting operations near the lighthouse? A pause. Negative, Cape Agony. Storm conditions. All vessels in port. Copy that. Cape Agony out. He sat in the keeper's chair and listened to the singing. It continued through dinner, through the sunset, through the automatic engagement of the lamp at 6:43. The beam swept the darkness every 10 seconds, illuminating rain and spray and the ragged shapes of rocks below. No figure, no source. Nolan had spent enough time at sea to know about auditory illusions. Wind through rock formations could sound like voices. Seals made noises that resembled human cries. The ocean was full of sounds that the human brain interpreted as something familiar, something meaningful, when in reality they were just the random collision of natural forces. He went to bed at 10, the singing still audible through the stone walls. He dreamed of drowning, of cold water filling his lungs while a woman's voice sang him deeper into darkness. He woke at 3 a.m. to silence. The singing had stopped. The wind had dropped. The waves had calmed to a low susurration. Nolan lay in bed, listening to the new quiet, and found it more disturbing than the singing had been. The storm had been raging for 3 days. Weather didn't change this abruptly without reason. He dressed and climbed to the lamp room. The beam swept its regular pattern across calm water. The moon was nearly full, turning the Atlantic into a sheet of hammered silver. Beautiful. Wrong. The barometer showed low pressure. Storm conditions should be continuing. Movement on the rocks below caught his eye. A figure, human-shaped, standing where no human could stand, where waves had been crashing with lethal force just hours before. Nolan grabbed his binoculars and focused. A woman, young, though distance made details difficult. Long dark hair, pale skin. She stood motionless, facing the lighthouse, her posture suggesting patience rather than distress. Nolan watched her for 10 minutes. She didn't move, didn't signal, just stood on rocks that should be underwater at high tide, that should be slick and impossible to navigate, and looked up at the light. He tried the radio. Cape Agony Light to Harborview Station. Static. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. The radio had worked fine 12 hours ago. Now it produced only white noise, as if something was jamming the signal. Nolan returned to the gallery. The figure remained on the rocks. As he watched, she raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or a summons. The singing started again, closer now, as if the woman had moved, though Nolan was certain she hadn't. The melody wrapped around the lighthouse like a physical thing, seeping through cracks in the stone, filling the lamp room with sound. Nolan understood in that moment that he was in danger. Not the obvious danger of storms or equipment failure or running out of supplies. Something else. Something that had been waiting at Cape Agony for a reason the lighthouse had earned its name. He descended to the keeper's quarters and locked the door. Absurd. As if a lock could protect against something that could stand on rocks in the middle of the ocean and sing through solid stone. But the human instinct for barriers was strong even when reason said they were useless. He spent the rest of the night sitting in the keeper's chair, listening to the singing, watching the clock move with glacial slowness toward dawn. The woman's voice never wavered, never paused for breath, a constant melodic line that suggested something inhuman sustaining it, lungs that didn't need air or a throat that didn't tire. Dawn arrived gray and cold. The singing stopped with the sunrise, cutting off mid-phrase. Nolan climbed to the gallery and looked at the rocks. The figure was gone. The storm returned an hour later, wind and waves crashing against the lighthouse with renewed fury. Nolan checked the barometer. Still low pressure. The calm period during the night had been an anomaly. A bubble of impossible weather that had appeared and vanished without explanation. He tried the radio. It worked perfectly. Cape Agony Light to Harborview Station. Harborview Station. Go ahead. Did you observe any unusual weather last night? Calm conditions between 0300 and 0600. A pause. Negative, Cape Agony. Storm continued through the night. You okay up there? Copy. I'm fine. Cape Agony out. Nolan sat at the small desk in the keeper's quarters and tried to think rationally. He was isolated, sleep-deprived. The human brain under stress produced hallucinations, false memories, phantom experiences. But hallucinations didn't show up in binoculars, didn't create specific, detailed images of women standing on rocks. He opened the logbook where keepers recorded daily observations. The most recent entry was his own from the previous morning. Before that, entries from his predecessor, whose 6-month tenure had ended when Nolan arrived. He flipped back through months of observations, weather conditions, ships spotted, maintenance performed. Then, 3 months into the previous keeper's tenure, a different kind of entry. Heard singing from the rocks. No source visible. Weather calm despite storm conditions predicted. The next entry, singing continues. Figure spotted on rocks below at 0300 hours, unable to determine identity. Radio contact intermittent. Then, saw the woman clearly tonight. She's been here before. The rocks remember her. The entries became increasingly disjointed. She wants me to come down. The singing is a summons. Every keeper hears it eventually. That's why the posting is only 6 months. That's why they rotate us through. The final entry, written in a shaking hand. I understand now. The lighthouse isn't here to warn ships away from the rocks. It's here to provide her with company. Every keeper is a sacrifice. I won't go down to her. I won't. The entries ended. Nolan flipped forward to his own arrival. His predecessor's name had been Thomas Kiernan. According to the official records, Kiernan had completed his 6-month tenure and departed for the mainland without incident. But the final entry suggested something else. Nolan spent the day researching the lighthouse's history, using the small collection of books in the keeper's quarters. Cape Agony had been built in 1862 after a particularly deadly shipwreck. 200 souls lost when a passenger ship struck the rocks during a storm. Among them, a young woman named Margaret Winslow, whose body had never been recovered. Local legend claimed she still haunted the rocks, singing to lure ships to their doom. The lighthouse was meant to counteract her influence, but according to the stories, she'd simply adapted. Instead of luring ships, she now lured the keepers who maintained the warning light. Folklore, superstition, the kind of stories coastal communities told to add color to their history. Nolan had spent his career studying actual marine phenomena, not ghost stories. But the singing was real, the figure on the rocks was real, and Thomas Kiernan's final log entries suggested this had happened before. The singing started again at 6 p.m., precisely at sunset. Nolan was in the lamp room when it began. He'd been preparing himself, telling himself he would observe scientifically, collect data, find a rational explanation. The woman was standing on the rocks below, closer to the lighthouse than before. Close enough that Nolan could see her face clearly through the binoculars. She was beautiful in a way that felt deliberately designed to appeal to him specifically. Features that matched some template buried in his unconscious. She wore a gray dress that moved in the wind, though Nolan noticed the fabric moved wrong, too slow, as if underwater rather than in air. She was singing directly to him, looking up at the lamp room, making eye contact across 200 feet of distance and darkness. Her mouth moved with the melody, and Nolan found himself leaning forward, straining to hear the words, though he knew there were no words, just pure vocalization. The melody was changing him. He could feel it working on his nervous system, bypassing conscious thought and speaking directly to something primitive in his brain, the part that responded to rhythm and pattern, the part that wanted to move toward beauty regardless of danger. His body wanted to go to her. His legs were moving him toward the stairs without his permission. He grabbed the railing to stop himself, hands clenching brass until his knuckles went white. The singing intensified. The woman raised her arms in a gesture of welcome. Come down. Come to the rocks. Come to the water. Nolan forced himself to look away, to break eye contact. The moment he did, the compulsion eased slightly. He staggered back from the gallery and descended to the keeper's quarters. He locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. The singing continued for hours. Nolan covered his ears, but the sound came through his hands, through the stone, through his bones. It was inside him now, resonating in his skull, tuning his body to its frequency. He thought about Thomas Kiernan, about the desperate final log entry. "I won't go down to her. I won't. I won't," repeated like a mantra, like a man trying to convince himself of something he knew was inevitable. The singing stopped at dawn. Nolan climbed to the lamp room on shaking legs. The rocks below were empty. The storm was still raging. The barometer showed no change. He tried the radio. Cape Agony Light to Harborview Station. Harborview Station. Go ahead. I need to request early termination of my posting. Medical emergency. A pause. What's the nature of the emergency, Cape Agony? What could he say? That a ghost was singing to him. That he was being compelled to throw himself from the lighthouse. Personal medical issue. I need replacement as soon as weather permits. Copy that. We'll send a boat when the storm clears. Probably 3 to 4 days. Can you hold on that long? Nolan looked at the rocks below, at the place where the woman stood every night. I'll try. Cape Agony, you're our 4th request for early termination this year. Are conditions up there really that bad? 4th request. How many keepers had Cape Agony gone through? How many had heard the singing and fled? How many had gone down to the rocks and never returned? It's manageable, Nolan lied. Just a personal issue. Copy. Hang tight. Harborview out. Nolan spent the day preparing. He took the chair from the keeper's quarters and wedged it against the lamproom door. He found rope and tied himself to the brass railing, reasoning that if the compulsion became overwhelming, the physical restraint might save him. He wrote a detailed account of everything he'd experienced and sealed it in the logbook. If he didn't survive, maybe someone would read it. Maybe they'd finally shut down the lighthouse, staff it remotely, end the cycle of keepers being fed to whatever waited on the rocks below. The singing started at 6 p.m. Nolan was ready. He was tied to the railing. The door was barricaded. He'd stuffed cotton in his ears and wrapped a scarf around his head to muffle the sound. None of it mattered. The singing bypassed his ears entirely. It resonated in his chest, in his bones, in the spaces between his thoughts. The woman stood on the rocks below, closer than ever, near enough that he could see individual strands of her hair moving in wind that shouldn't exist. She was singing his name, not with words, but he understood it anyway. Nolan, Nolan, come down, come home. His body strained against the ropes. His hands worked at the knots automatically, possessed by something that wasn't quite him. The rational part of his mind watched from a distance, horrified, as his body betrayed him. He got one hand free, then the other. His legs carried him toward the stairs. Some part of him understood that if he descended to the rocks, he would die. He would be dashed against stone, or dragged into the water, or simply dissolved into the singing. His identity absorbed into the melody that had been playing for 160 years. But another part, stronger now, understood that this was inevitable. Every keeper heard the singing eventually. Every keeper went down to the rocks. The lighthouse wasn't protection. It was a hunting blind. And he was the prey. Nolan stood at the door to the gallery. His hand reached for the handle. The light swept overhead. 10 seconds of illumination. 10 seconds of darkness. The beam had been warning ships for 60 years, but it had never warned the keepers. They were already lost the moment they accepted the posting. His hand turned the handle. The door opened. Cold wind hit his face. The singing swelled to a crescendo. The woman stood at the base of the cliff, arms outstretched, welcoming him home. Nolan stepped out onto the gallery. One more step, and he'd be at the railing. One more, and he'd climb over. One more, and he'd fall 200 feet to the rocks below where Margaret Winslow had been waiting since 1862. The light swept overhead. In that moment of illumination, Nolan saw the rocks below clearly, and he saw that the woman was not alone. Dozens of figures stood with her, men in various forms of decay, some recent enough to still look human, others worn by water and time into suggestions of humanity, all of them looking up at the lighthouse, all of them singing. Every keeper who'd ever heard the song, every man who'd come down to the rocks, they hadn't died. They'd joined her, become part of the chorus, their voices blending into the eternal melody that lured the next keeper and the next and the next. Nolan understood. The singing wasn't about killing. It was about recruitment. Margaret Winslow had been alone for so long on those rocks. Now she had company, an ever-growing chorus of drowned men who sang with her through the storms. He climbed over the railing. The fall seemed to last forever, long enough to see his entire life, long enough to understand every choice that had led him to this moment, long enough to accept what he was becoming. The rocks rushed up to meet him. The singing never stopped. When the Coast Guard arrived 4 days later, they found the lighthouse abandoned. The light was still functioning, sweeping its pattern across calm water. The keepers' quarters were neat and organized. The logbook contained a detailed account of unusual auditory phenomena and a figure spotted on the rocks. Nolan Hetherington's body was never recovered. The posting for Cape Agony lighthouse keeper went up the following week, 6 months. Room and board provided, solitary work for those who preferred isolation. Applications arrived within days. Someone always needed the job. Someone always heard the singing eventually. And the chorus on the rocks below grew larger every year. Story 4. Dr. Meredith Kane's private practice occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian on Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts. She'd been seeing patients there for 14 years, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. She knew the building's sounds intimately. The creak of the third step on the stairway, the rattle of old pipes when someone used the bathroom, the particular groan of the building settling as temperatures changed. So when her 4 o'clock appointment arrived at 4 o'clock exactly, and Meredith heard footsteps on the stairs, she knew before the door opened that something was wrong. The footsteps were too light, too hesitant, not the confident stride of someone arriving for their weekly session. The door opened, and Meredith looked up from her notes. The woman standing in the doorway was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and pale skin and an expression of profound uncertainty. "Dr. Kane," the woman said, "I'm Sarah Bellamy. I have a 4 o'clock appointment." Meredith checked her schedule. Sarah Bellamy's name was indeed listed for 4 o'clock, but Meredith had never met this woman before. Her 4 o'clock Tuesday slot belonged to David Chen, a 38-year-old software engineer dealing with workplace anxiety. David had been coming for 6 months. "I'm sorry," Meredith said carefully. "I think there's been some confusion with the scheduling. My 4 o'clock appointment is with someone else." Sarah's expression shifted to concern. "No, I confirmed this morning. I've been coming here for 2 months, every Tuesday at 4. Meredith felt the first cold touch of wrongness. What did we discuss in our last session? Sarah sat down in the client chair, the movement automatic and familiar. We talked about my mother, how I'm still processing her death. You suggested I try writing letters to her, even though she's gone. Meredith had never suggested that therapeutic technique to any client. She found it performative and rarely effective. Yet Sarah spoke with the certainty of someone recounting real events. Can you describe our previous sessions? Meredith asked. Sarah frowned. We've been meeting since September, 8 sessions total. We've talked about my mother's death, my difficulty forming relationships, my insomnia. You said I might have PTSD from finding her body. Meredith's hands had gone cold. How did your mother die? Suicide, in February. I found her in her apartment. She'd taken pills. The details were specific, consistent. Sarah was either an exceptional liar or genuinely believed these sessions had occurred, but Meredith's calendar showed no record of Sarah Bellamy before today. And more disturbing, where was David Chen? Meredith pulled up David's contact information and sent a quick text. Everything okay? You missed your appointment. I'm going to be honest with you, Meredith said to Sarah. I have no memory of our previous sessions. I'm not saying you're lying, but I don't have any record of treating you. Sarah's eyes widened. What? We've been meeting every Tuesday for 2 months. You've been helping me work through my grief. Do you have any proof? Receipts? Appointment confirmation emails? Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. She held the screen toward Meredith. 8 confirmation emails from Meredith's practice email address, scheduling appointments with Sarah Bellamy. Tuesdays at 4 p.m., September through October. Meredith checked her own email. No record of sending those messages. She checked her billing records. No Sarah Bellamy. This doesn't make sense, Meredith said. Do you keep session notes? Sarah asked. Meredith opened her filing cabinet and pulled the folder labeled with the current month. She flipped through notes from recent sessions. Then she found them, 8 sets of notes documenting sessions with Sarah Bellamy. In her own handwriting, detailed observations about Sarah's grief, her difficulty connecting with others, her insomnia and anxiety. Meredith stared at the notes. She'd written them. She recognized her own hand, her own abbreviations, her own particular way of structuring session observations. But she had no memory of writing them, no memory of the sessions they described. I think, Meredith said slowly, we should use this session to explore what's happening right now, because something is very wrong. Sarah leaned forward. Do you believe in ghosts, Dr. Kane? Meredith had been a clinical psychologist for 23 years. She believed in trauma and memory and the brain's capacity to create meaning from chaos. She did not believe in ghosts. I believe in experiences that feel real to the people having them, Meredith said carefully. My mother used to come to you, Sarah said, before she died. She saw you for 6 months. You were trying to help her with depression. Meredith's throat tightened. What was your mother's name? Ellen Bellamy. Meredith opened her filing cabinet again. She found Ellen Bellamy's file, notes documenting 6 months of treatment ending in February. Severe depression, suicidal ideation. They'd been working on safety planning, on building support networks, on medication management with Ellen's psychiatrist. Ellen had stopped coming to sessions in late February. She'd canceled 2 appointments, then stopped responding to calls and emails. Meredith had followed up. Left messages, sent letters. No response. Eventually, following ethical protocols for abandoned treatment, Meredith had closed Ellen's file. She'd never learned that Ellen had died. I didn't know, Meredith said quietly. She stopped coming. I tried to follow up. I know, Sarah said. I found your messages when I cleaned out her apartment. You tried. She'd made her decision by then. Nothing was going to change her mind. I'm very sorry for your loss. She's not lost, Sarah said. She's here, in this office. She's been coming to her appointments even though she's dead. And somehow I started coming too, as if I inherited her slot on your schedule. The office felt colder. Meredith glanced at the window. Closed. The heating system hummed normally, but the temperature had dropped perceptibly. Tell me exactly what happened in our previous sessions, Meredith said. Everything you remember. Sarah described 8 sessions in detail. Topics discussed. Therapeutic interventions. Progress made. Every detail matched the notes in the file Meredith had supposedly written, but had no memory of writing. In our last session, Sarah said, we talked about how grief can feel like being haunted. Like the dead person is still present, still making demands. You said that healing means learning to live with their absence. Meredith had said that, or she would have said that, if she'd been treating someone with complicated grief. It was consistent with her therapeutic approach. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. What do you mean I missed my appointment? I've been on vacation for 2 weeks. You approved my leave last month. Meredith checked her calendar again. David Chen's name was gone from the 4 p.m. Tuesday slot. In its place, Sarah Bellamy, marked as recurring from September through the present. The calendar was changing, retroactively, as if Sarah had always been the 4 p.m. Tuesday appointment, as if David Chen had never existed in that time slot. Something is rewriting my records, Meredith said, changing my calendar, creating false notes, false memories. Not false, Sarah said. Real. The sessions happened. You just don't remember them because you weren't fully present. My mother was here instead. She's been coming to her appointments, and somehow that created space for me to come too. That's not possible. Neither is having detailed notes about sessions you don't remember having. Neither is 8 confirmation emails you don't remember sending. Neither is a client sitting in front of you who you've apparently been treating for 2 months. Meredith's professional training demanded rationality, memory issues, dissociative episodes, stress-induced gaps in consciousness. But none of those explanations fit. She'd been functioning normally, seeing other clients, living her life. She would have noticed missing time, unless the missing time only appeared when Ellen Bellamy's ghost occupied this office. If your mother is here, Meredith said, why can't I see her? Because she's not here for you. She's here for herself. She's continuing treatment, still trying to get better, still holding her 4 p.m. Tuesday appointment even though she's dead. The office felt increasingly wrong. The air was thick, resistant, like breathing through cloth. The light had taken on a quality Meredith couldn't name. Too flat, too gray, as if seen through a filter. Are you real? Meredith asked. Are you actually Ellen's daughter, or are you something else? Sarah smiled, and the smile was sad and knowing. I'm real, but I'm also dead. I found my mother in February, and I couldn't live with what I found. I took the same pill she did, same dose, same note. We're both gone now. We're both still trying to get help, both still coming to our appointments. Meredith stood abruptly. I think you need to leave. You can't send away a client in crisis, Dr. Kane. That would be unethical. You're not my client. You're not real. I'm as real as your notes say I am. As real as your calendar shows. As real as the 8 confirmation emails. Reality is what we agree it is. And according to every record, I've been your client for 2 months. Meredith walked to the door and opened it. Please leave my office. Sarah didn't move. If I leave, I'll just come back next week. I always come back. The dead keep their appointments, Dr. Kane. We're very reliable that way. Meredith's next client was due in an hour. A real client. Living. She needed Sarah gone before then. She needed time to think, to make sense of this, to find a rational explanation. What do you want? Meredith asked. The same thing my mother wanted. Help. Treatment. Someone to talk to about how hard it is to be this way. Do you know what it's like to be dead but not gone? To be trapped in the pattern of your life, repeating the same appointments, the same conversations, never moving forward. That's grief, Meredith said. That's how the bereaved feel. You're projecting your experience of loss onto a fantasy where your mother is still present. Is that what your notes say? That I'm projecting? Meredith looked at the file on her desk. The notes described a more complex dynamic. A patient struggling with the boundary between life and death, with the possibility that consciousness persisted after physical death, with the question of whether seeking therapy as a ghost was meaningful or absurd. She hadn't written those notes, couldn't have written them, yet they were in her handwriting, using her clinical terminology, structured exactly as she structured all her session notes. How many other clients are like this? Meredith asked quietly. Sarah's expression shifted to something like pity. How many clients do you actually remember, Dr. Kane? Can you picture all their faces? Can you recall every session? Meredith tried. She had 43 active clients. She should be able to picture each one. But when she reached for their faces, their names, the details of their cases, she found gaps, spaces where memories should be but weren't. Clients she'd supposedly been seeing for months whom she couldn't visualize at all. Check your files, Sarah said. See how many you actually remember. Meredith pulled open the filing cabinet. 43 active client files. She went through them one by one. For some, she had clear memories. Real people with real problems. Sessions she could recall in detail. But others were like Sarah. Detailed notes in her handwriting, documenting sessions she had no memory of conducting. 17 files. 17 clients she'd been seeing regularly. Writing notes about, billing insurance for. But couldn't remember meeting. They're all dead, Sarah said. All 17. They died during treatment or before treatment, and they kept coming anyway. Because therapy is routine, and the dead love routine. And you've been treating them without knowing it, because we occupy a space you can't quite see. We're in the gaps of your awareness, the moments you don't quite remember. Meredith sat down heavily. This isn't possible. You're a therapist. You know that what's possible and what's real aren't always the same thing. You've had clients who experienced impossible things. Trauma that rewrote reality. Grief that brought the dead back in tangible ways. You've always explained it as psychological projection, as the mind creating meaning from loss. But what if it was real? What if the dead really do come back, and they come to their therapist because you're the ones who are obligated to listen? Meredith thought about ethical obligations, client confidentiality, duty to maintain care, the requirement to see clients through crisis, not to abandon them when treatment became difficult. You can't abandon us, Sarah said, as if reading her thoughts. We're your clients. We trust you. We need you. You're dead. I can't help you. You've been helping us. For months. The notes show real progress. Ellen's depression is lifting. Mine too. Whatever we are, wherever we are, therapy is working. We're getting better. Meredith looked at the notes. Sarah was right. The documentation showed clear therapeutic progress. Reduction in depressive symptoms. Development of coping skills. Movement toward acceptance and peace. Impossible progress for people who were dead. What happens when you're healed? Meredith asked. When you don't need therapy anymore? Sarah smiled. Maybe then we can finally rest. Maybe that's what keeps us here. Unfinished business. In our case, unfinished therapy. So I'm supposed to continue treating dead people until they feel sufficiently resolved to move on. Would that be so different from treating living people? You see them for as long as they need you, then they leave. We're the same, just less obvious about being here. Meredith's next appointment was in 30 minutes. A living client. She could visualize him clearly. Remembered last week's session in detail. He was real, but how many of her appointments were with ghosts? I need you to leave, Meredith said. I need time to think about this. Sarah stood. I'll see you next Tuesday, 4 p.m. Please don't miss our appointment, Dr. Kane. Consistency is important for therapeutic progress. She walked to the door, and Meredith noticed for the first time that Sarah cast no reflection in the window glass. She simply passed through space without leaving any mark on it. The door closed. Meredith sat alone in her office, surrounded by files documenting treatment she couldn't remember providing to clients who might not exist, or who existed in a way that defied every rational framework she'd built her career on. She thought about Ellen Bellamy, about how she'd failed to prevent Ellen's suicide, how Ellen had stopped coming to sessions, stopped responding to outreach, and Meredith had followed protocol but hadn't pushed harder, hadn't done more. Maybe this was penance, continuing to treat clients even after death, making sure they received the help they needed, even when they could no longer benefit from it, in traditional ways. Or maybe she was experiencing a psychotic break. Stress-induced delusions, false memories, the human brain's capacity to create elaborate narratives from nothing. She scheduled an appointment with her own therapist. She needed to talk this through with someone. She needed to determine if she was experiencing a mental health crisis, or if something genuinely impossible was happening in her practice. Her 5 p.m. appointment arrived. Jonathan Price, 53, recently divorced. She remembered him clearly. The session proceeded normally. Jonathan talked about his week, his struggles with loneliness, his difficulty adjusting to single life after 27 years of marriage. Real, concrete, grounded in present reality. After Jonathan left, Meredith pulled his file. The notes were detailed, consistent with what she remembered. She could picture every session they'd had over the past 4 months. She pulled another file at random. Amanda Torres, 29, anxiety, disorder. Meredith opened the notes and found detailed documentation of 10 sessions. She had no memory of Amanda Torres, couldn't picture her face, couldn't recall a single session. She looked up Amanda Torres online. Obituary from July. Died in a car accident, age 29. Meredith had been seeing Amanda for 3 months after Amanda died. She checked the other 16 files. All the clients she couldn't quite remember. 15 of them had obituaries. Died during the period Meredith had supposedly been treating them. One had no online presence at all. No obituary. No social media. No record of having existed except in Meredith's files. That client's next appointment was tomorrow at 10 a.m. Meredith went home. She didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd crossed some boundary between healer and haunted. If her practice had become a way station for the dead who needed one last thing before they could rest. The next morning, she arrived at her office. At 9:30, she unlocked the door and climbed the stairs, listening for the creak of the third step, the rattle of the pipes, the groan of the building settling. She heard something else. Voices, multiple voices, coming from inside her office. She opened the door. The waiting area was full of people, sitting in chairs, standing against walls, all of them looking at her with expressions of need and hope. She recognized Sarah Bellamy, Ellen Bellamy standing beside her daughter, Amanda Torres, others whose names she knew from files but whose faces she'd never seen. "We're early," Sarah said. "We wanted to make sure we didn't miss our appointments." Meredith counted them. 17 people, 17 dead clients, all waiting for their sessions, all expecting her to help them. She could run. She could call someone. She could check herself into a hospital and admit that she'd lost her grip on reality. Or she could sit down, open her notebook, and call the first client into her office, because they were her clients, living or dead. They trusted her, they needed her, and she'd taken an oath to do no harm, to maintain care, to see treatment through to completion. Meredith took a breath. "Who has the 10 a.m. appointment?" A man in his 40s raised his hand. "That's me, Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw. No obituary. No online presence. Possibly never alive at all. Just a ghost who needed therapy and had manifested an appointment in her calendar." "Come in, Martin," Meredith said. He followed her into the office, sat in the client chair, looked at her with eyes that might have been human or might have been something else entirely. "I'm glad we're finally meeting," Martin said. "I've been meaning to talk to someone for a very long time." "How long?" Meredith asked. "Since I died in 1974. Meredith opened her notebook, picked up her pen, began to write. Outside, in the waiting area, 16 more clients sat patiently. They had all the time in the world. And Dr. Meredith Kane had made a commitment to help them, even if that help extended beyond the boundary of life itself. Even if it meant she could never be certain which of her clients were real, and which were ghosts seeking one final session before they could rest. She conducted Martin Shaw's therapy session, then the next clients, then the next, hour after hour, treating the dead with the same care and attention she gave the living. By evening, when her last living client of the day arrived, Meredith could no longer remember which sessions had been real and which had been something else. And she understood that this was her life now. This was her practice. Therapy for those who could no longer benefit from it in any traditional sense, but who needed it nonetheless. The dead keep their appointments. They're very reliable that way. Story 5. The highway stretched eternal under Marcus Trent's headlights, white lines flickering past in hypnotic rhythm. He'd been driving for 11 hours, hauling refrigerated produce from Bakersfield to Portland, and his body ached with the particular fatigue of long-haul trucking. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m., another 6 hours minimum before he reached the depot. Our Interstate 5 through Northern California was familiar territory. Marcus had driven this route maybe 300 times in his 8 years as an independent trucker. He knew every rest stop, every way station, every place where cops liked to hide looking for speeders. The road was as known to him as his own face. which is why he noticed immediately when the exit sign appeared. Milepost 247, no town name, just a number and an arrow pointing right. Marcus had never seen this exit before. He was certain of it. He'd driven past milepost 247 hundreds of times. There was no exit there. The next exit was milepost 263, 16 miles north. A truck stop with decent coffee and terrible food. But the sign was there, reflecting in his headlights. Undeniably real. Marcus was 56, divorced twice, with a daughter he saw maybe 3 times a year. He'd been driving trucks since he was 22, and the road had taught him one critical lesson. When something felt wrong, it was wrong. Trust your instincts. Don't investigate. Keep moving. He drove past the exit without slowing. The next sign appeared 2 minutes later. Milepost 247. Same arrow. Same anonymous exit. Marcus checked his odometer. He'd traveled 3.2 miles since the first sign. He should be at milepost 250 now. Instead, he was back at 247. He grabbed his CB radio. This is northbound 79er to any trucks in the area. Anybody on I-5 near milepost 247? Static. No response. Northbound 79er to any station. Come back if you copy. More static. The radio was working. He could hear the carrier wave. But no one was responding. At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, there should be at least a dozen truckers on this stretch of highway. Someone should answer. The exit sign appeared again. Milepost 247. Marcus checked his odometer again. 3.4 miles. He was looping. Somehow, impossibly, he was driving the same 3-mile stretch of highway repeatedly. He pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Engine idling. Hazards flashing. The highway stretched empty in both directions, illuminated by his headlights and the dim glow of widely spaced streetlights. Marcus climbed down from the cab. The night was cold and still. No wind, no sound of other traffic. Just the rumble of his own engine and the vast silence of the California night. He walked around the truck, checking tires, looking for any mechanical issue that might explain what was happening. Everything was normal. The truck was fine. The road surface was fine. The world appeared entirely ordinary except for the fact that he was trapped in a 3-mile loop of highway. He climbed back into the cab and drove north again. Slowly this time, 20 miles per hour, watching the road carefully for any sign of disturbance or illusion. The exit sign appeared. Milepost 247. Marcus's hands were shaking. He'd driven millions of miles over 3 decades. He'd seen weird things, optical illusions, fatigue hallucinations. Once, on a 40-hour marathon run, he'd seen a hitchhiker who vanished when he got closer. But nothing like this. Nothing that violated the basic physical laws of space and distance. He tried his cell phone. No signal. Not unusual in rural California. But combined with everything else, it felt deliberately isolating. As if he'd been cut off from the world and left alone with this impossible highway. The digital clock on his dashboard read 2:47 a.m. It had read 2:47 a.m. when he first noticed the exit. Time was looping along with the highway. Marcus felt cold panic rising in his chest. He'd heard stories from other truckers, urban legends about highways that trapped drivers, about loops you couldn't escape, about roads that led nowhere, and drivers who were never seen again. He'd always dismissed them as campfire tales, entertainment during long nights on the road. Now he was living one. He tried the exit, took the ramp slowly, watching for any sign of danger. The ramp curved right and deposited him back onto the highway. Northbound, milepost 247 directly ahead. The loop was inescapable. Forward led back to the beginning. The exit led back to the beginning. There was no south, no north, no escape. Just 3 miles of highway repeating eternally. Marcus pulled over again. He needed to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. A logical reason why he was trapped in this loop. He pulled out his atlas. Old school paper maps because he didn't trust GPS. The map showed Interstate 5 running straight through this section of California. No loops, no exits at milepost 247. Just uninterrupted highway. But he was in a loop. He could feel it. The truck's odometer proved it. Marcus sat in the cab and tried to remember. Had anything unusual happened today? Any strange encounter? Any moment where reality felt slightly off? The last truck stop. He'd stopped for fuel and coffee around 9 p.m. The attendant had been a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and an expression that suggested profound sadness. She'd taken his credit card without speaking, handed him his receipt, and said something he'd almost missed. Drive safe. Don't stop for anyone. An odd thing to say. Marcus had thought about it as he pulled back onto the highway, then dismissed it. Truck stop workers said all kinds of things. Don't stop for anyone. Sure. He never picked up hitchhikers anyway. But there'd been something in her tone. A warning. And now he was trapped. Marcus tried driving the loop again. This time, he counted seconds, tracking exactly how long it took to return to. Milepost 247. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, always exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds, regardless of his speed. Time and space were locked together here. The loop wasn't just geographical, it was temporal. Every 3 minutes and 40 seconds, he returned to the same moment, the same position, the same configuration of reality. He tried stopping mid-loop. Parked at what should be milepost 245. Sat there for 5 minutes, then drove forward. The exit sign appeared immediately. Milepost 247. The loop reset when he moved, or maybe the loop was independent of his movement. Maybe time itself was looping, and his perception of driving was just an illusion to keep him occupied while eternity repeated itself. Marcus felt his sanity beginning to fray. He'd been alone on the road for years, but this was different. This was isolation of a metaphysical kind. Cut off not just from people, but from the linear progression of cause and effect. He saw the hitchhiker on his 17th loop. A figure standing on the shoulder, thumb out, illuminated briefly by his headlights. Marcus slammed on the brakes, the truck's load shifting with the sudden deceleration. His heart pounded. Someone else was here. Someone else was trapped in the loop. He pulled over and jumped down from the cab. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure didn't move. As Marcus approached, he realized it was the truck stop attendant. The young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. She stood motionless, thumb still raised, not acknowledging his presence. "Did you follow me here?" Marcus asked. "Are you stuck too?" She turned to look at him, and Marcus stopped walking. Her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep. Looking into them felt like looking into wells that went down forever. "You should have listened," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been at the truck stop, but colder, more distant. "I told you not to stop." "Stop for what? What is this place?" "The loop. The place where drivers go when they stay on the road too long. When they forget they have homes. When driving becomes all they are." Marcus backed toward his truck. "That's not... I have a life. I have a daughter. When did you last see her?" 6 months ago. She's busy. We text. When did you last sleep in a real bed?" Marcus tried to remember. He slept in the truck. Always in the truck. It was easier. He could cover more miles that way. "When did you last have a conversation with someone that lasted more than 5 minutes?" He couldn't remember. Couldn't remember the last real conversation. Just transactions. Fuel, food, load and unload. Keep moving. Always moving. You've been on the road so long, you became the road, the woman said. This loop is just the truth of what you've been living. Driving the same routes, seeing the same places, having the same thoughts. You've been in a loop for years. This is just the first time you've noticed. That's not true. I go different places. I see different things. Do you, or do you, just see highway, milepost markers, white lines, the endless asphalt? How long has it been since you saw anything that wasn't part of the road? Marcus tried to think of the last beautiful thing he'd seen. A sunset, a mountain, a face that made him feel something. He couldn't. His memory was full of highway. Nothing but highway, stretching back years. How do I get out? He asked. You don't. This is where drivers end up. The ones who gave up everything for the road. The road takes you in return. Forever. She walked toward the highway and stepped into the lane. Marcus yelled a warning, but no cars came. She stood in the center of the road, illuminated by streetlights that seemed dimmer now. Colder. How many of us are here? Marcus asked. Hundreds, all driving our own loops. 3 miles, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Forever. Marcus looked at his truck. His life. 8 years of independence, of freedom, of escaping the complications of relationships and responsibilities. 8 years that had hollowed him out until he was nothing but motion. Nothing but the act of driving. What if I stop driving? He asked. What if I just sit here and refuse to move? Then you'll sit here forever, frozen in one moment of the loop. But you won't stop driving. None of us can. The road is what we are now. She was right. Marcus could feel it. The compulsion to move, to drive, to keep traveling, even though he'd already arrived at the only destination that existed for him. He climbed back into the truck, started the engine, pulled onto the highway. The exit sign appeared. Milepost 247. He drove past it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, it appeared again. He drove for what might have been hours or might have been centuries. The clock always read 2:47 a.m. The odometer always showed 3.2 miles traveled. The highway always returned him to the same stretch of road. On his 43rd loop, or his 100th, or his 1000th, Marcus saw other trucks, scattered along the highway, parked on the shoulder, driving slowly in the lane ahead. All of them caught in the same eternal circuit. He tried his CB radio again. This time, voices answered. Northbound 79er to any trucks in the area. We're all in the area, a male voice responded. We're all right here, always right here. How long have you been here? Marcus asked. Don't know. Time doesn't pass, just repeats. I've driven this loop so many times I can't remember driving anything else. Another voice joined in. I've been here since 97, or maybe it's still 97. Hard to tell. And another. I think I've always been here. Can't remember anything before the loop. The radio filled with voices. Dozens of truckers, all trapped, all driving their 3-mile circuits, all locked into the highways. Eternal repetition. Is there a way out? Marcus asked. Silence. Then one voice, quieter than the others. If there is, none of us have found it. Marcus drove, loop after loop. The highway stretched identical in both directions. The same exit sign, the same mile markers, the same empty darkness surrounding the road. He thought about his daughter, Claire, 24, living in Portland, working as a graphic designer. When had they last had a real conversation? When had he last heard her voice? He tried calling her. No signal. Of course, no signal. The loop was sealed. Nothing got in. Nothing got out. He thought about the truck stop attendant. Don't stop for anyone. A warning he'd failed to understand. He'd already stopped. He'd stopped years ago without realizing it. Stopped living anything except the road. And now the road had claimed him completely. Marcus drove through what might have been days. Other trucks appeared and disappeared in the loop. Sometimes he'd pass the same truck 3 times in a row. Sometimes he'd be alone. The CB radio chattered constantly with the voices of trapped drivers, sharing observations, theories, memories that might or might not be real. "I think the loop is feeding on us," one driver said, "taking our time, our energy, our existence, and using it to sustain itself. We're fuel for the highway." "I think we created it," another said. "All of us. By driving the same route so many times, we wore grooves in reality. Now we're stuck in the grooves." Marcus didn't know which theory was true. Maybe both. Maybe neither. It didn't matter. The result was the same. Eternal highway. Eternal motion. Eternal return to the same 3 miles of road. He stopped trying to escape. The compulsion to drive was too strong. And where would he escape to? His apartment had been a place to store things between runs. His daughter was busy with her own life. His ex-wives had moved on decades ago. He had no destination except the next load, the next delivery, the next stretch of highway. He'd been in a loop long before the highway made it literal. Marcus drove. The clock read 2:47 a.m. The exit sign said milepost 247. The highway stretched empty ahead. He picked up his CB radio. "Northbound 79er to any trucks in the area. I'm accepting the loop. I'm accepting this is what I am." Voices responded, welcoming him. The other drivers who'd made the same acceptance, who'd realized there was nothing outside the loop because they'd erased everything outside the loop from their lives. The highway was home. The truck was home. 3 miles and 3 minutes and 40 seconds, repeating forever, was home. Marcus settled into the rhythm. He stopped counting loops, stopped trying to remember what day it was or how long he'd been driving. Time was meaningless here. Only motion mattered. Only the white lines flickering past and the engine's rumble and the slight vibration of the wheel under his hands. He was a truck driver. This was what he did. He drove forever. The exit sign appeared ahead. Milepost 247. Marcus drove past it without slowing. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, the exit sign appeared again. Marcus drove past it. Again, and again, and again, somewhere in Northern California, on a stretch of Interstate 5 that doesn't quite exist, trucks drive an eternal circuit. 3 miles, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, forever. The highway patrol never finds them. GPS shows them as stopped, frozen at their last known location. But they're not stopped. They're driving, always driving, caught in the rhythm they chose, the isolation they cultivated, the motion they made into identity. Marcus Trent's daughter will file a missing person report. The investigation will find his truck last pinged at a fuel stop near milepost 247. Search teams will drive that stretch of highway and find nothing because Marcus is already gone. Not dead, just driving, locked into the loop he built himself with 8 years of choosing. The road over everything else. The highway takes what you give it, and if you give it everything, it keeps you forever. Milepost 247. Exit right. But there's nowhere to exit to. There's only the road. There's only the loop. There's only the white lines flickering past and the clock that always reads 2:47 a.m. Forever. Thank you for spending this time in the darkness with me. These stories live in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, between the familiar and the strange. They remind us that horror often wears comfortable faces. The apartment we rent, the job we do, the roads we travel, the things we trust can become the things that unmake us. If these stories spoke to something in you, if they'll linger as you try to sleep, consider subscribing to the Stillness Broadcast. There are always more tales waiting in the quiet hours. Sleep well if you can. And remember, sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's hiding in the dark. It's what's been standing beside you all along. This has been the Stillness Broadcast. Until the darkness calls us together again.